Hey WordNerds! So if you have been following this channel for any length of time, you may be familiar with the way that Kelly and I met before we decided to form the WordNerds. We met on a website called absolutewrite.com where both of us were looking for beta readers, and at the time Kelly was reading a story I wrote called The Sad State of Emmeline Black. This was a full 7 years ago, and the story that Kelly read at the time has been rewritten and rewritten at least 3 times, and today it's called Escape to Which City. It's coming out August 3rd, and it is absolutely nothing like it was at first. When I say that I rewrote it 3 times, I mean I rewrote it. Like, rewrote it, as in none of the lines of the narrative or dialogue are the same. Literally 2 of the names are the only thing that stay the same. Emmeline Black and her friend Maddie, or Madeline, are the only remaining things left from the first draft that Kelly read. So after my publisher, Penguin Random House, aka Tundra Books, picked up this story, they asked me to rewrite it for what would be the 3rd time. And at that time I had a total and complete case of writer's block. I don't know if it was just that I'd rewritten the story so many times and couldn't conceive of a new way to write it, or maybe I was just frustrated and burnt out, but whatever the case was, at the time I was lucky enough to have been flown out to Toronto by my publisher to go to a festival in Toronto to talk about The Strange and Deadly Portraits of Bryony Gray, which was my first book, and I got to meet up with Kelly in the lobby of the hotel I was staying at. And I remember it was pouring with rain outside. I think there was thunder and maybe lightning too, and we were just like huddled up at this one end of a really long lobby table, and there was like a cafe there, and we had got the best tasting Earl Grey tea I have ever had, I think. And we were just sort of, I think we brainstormed for probably close to 2 hours and rewrote the entire outline for this story that was to go on to be retitled to Escape to Which City. And one of the things that we discussed on this brainstorming session was the idea of this magical city that I was calling at the time Which City. And it was something that had been mentioned very briefly at the end of the original manuscript, both versions of the original manuscript actually, versions 1 and 2. And it was just like an offhand remark in the first one. In the second one, the characters were fleeing this horrible, like at the time it was a hospital or an insane asylum, I don't know. There's been so many versions, but they were fleeing this horrible place that they had been trapped in, and their idea was to get to which city. And that was really just that one offhand mention of this place, and nothing else had come of it. And both Kelly and my publisher, Penguin Random House, had said to me, look, this place sounds really interesting. We would like to actually see it on the page. So it was decided that this Which City would not only be an offhand mention, it would be one of the major settings of the book. And I think, as you can probably tell from the title, it became not only the main setting, but the whole goal of the entire story. The character's goal is to get there. And when they arrive there, it's to save the city, which is under threat. So it went from essentially this offhand mention in the first manuscript to the whole point of the book. And one thing that I never told anybody, and you guys are literally the first people to know if you are watching this video right now, is that the setting for the book, the setting for Which City, came to me in a kind of a bizarre way. Today, now, in our year of 2021, against all odds, my mental health is probably the best it's ever been. But several years ago, when I was writing and rewriting and rewriting Escape to Which City, that was definitely not the case. And that's not to say that the writing of this manuscript or having to rewrite it again was what caused the mental health issue. It was actually something that I was dealing with that I didn't even have a name for at the time. It wasn't until much later that I got a diagnosis for somatic OCD and realized what it was I was dealing with and how to actually deal with it. But now on to how did Which City come to be. If you are familiar with OCD, you may know that, particularly actually with somatic OCD, it has a way of hooking its claws into you in your most vulnerable states. So the time that you have quiet times, the time where you are trying to, for example, fall asleep at night, is when the thoughts or the obsessions will come creeping in and turn into like this vicious cycle of you're trying to get to sleep, and so you have all this extra time to think, and the thoughts come in and then you can't sleep because you're in the middle of an anxiety attack. So one of the things I used to do to keep my mind from wandering as I fell asleep at night was to walk myself in my mind through the old childhood houses that I had lived in. And that sounds really weird. I don't know if other people do it when they're trying to fall asleep, but I would literally lie there and I would picture, oh, this is the house I lived in when I was 10. I still remember the layout. And I would lie there, and as I was dropping off to sleep, I would walk my way through it, through the kitchen, through the living room. I go down to the end of the hall and my old bedroom was on the left. And this was something that kept my mind busy enough to keep it from straying into dangerous territory, but it wasn't so riveting that I couldn't fall asleep. But sooner or later, the issue was that I ran out of houses. There are only so many times you can walk yourself through your old childhood house when you lived in it at 10 years old and still have it be interesting enough. So I ran into the issue of I need somewhere else that I can, stroll through in my mind at night to keep me occupied and to keep my thoughts from looping into that cycle. So I ended up shifting to another setting, and this time it turned out to be a fictional one. It wasn't any kind of conscious choice. It was just something that kind of popped into my mind, and every time at night I would lie down and I would sort of go drifting through these streets that I would build as I went along, building on cobblestone streets and storefronts as I went along each night. I would imagine lanterns lit by magic hanging on the eaves of shop windows, a town populated by witches and run by magic. It was a place that ended up taking on a personality of its own, this warm, comforting place that welcomed travelers inside, but was capable of literally shifting to trap or keep out those that meant its inhabitants harm. I did not intend to create a metaphor for my own mind, but that is very much what it looks like when I look back on that. In the space of my own thoughts, my own mind, I had to keep shifting. I had to keep running down different streets and going from building to building, constantly shifting and moving to keep these unwelcome visitors, these intrusive thoughts out. There was nothing clever about Witch City when I first started constructing it every night. There was nothing that was meant to be symbolic, but it just kind of accidentally turned out that way. But I know that this August, when Escape to Witch City finally comes out and I get to see it on the shelves, that I'm going to feel a kind of victory being able to see it there. Not only because it's the work of 7 long years, but it symbolizes closing a chapter of my life. Witch City is a place that I spent so many nights visiting. It's a place that protected me, but it's also something I don't need anymore. So yeah, that's the story of Witch City and how it came to be. Feels a little weird to say that out loud, but there it is. Let me know if you guys come up with settings or characters in kind of weird, different ways. I'd love to hear your guys' story. Be sure to drop them in the comments below. You can also follow me over on Instagram for more updates on Witch City. I also use Instagram to talk a lot about mental health and how artists and writers deal with it. And I post regular updates about my work. Don't forget, 7:30 Eastern Standard Time on Sundays, the WordNerds have our live chats, and we would love to see you there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.